In December 1872, a ship was found drifting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, her sails set, her cargo intact, a half-eaten meal still on the table, and not a single living soul on board. The 10 people who had been aboard the Mary Celeste were simply gone, and no trace of them was ever found. The lifeboat was missing, as if they had chosen to abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship in the open ocean, a decision that makes no sense to this day. She is the most famous ghost ship in history, and she is #1 on this list. But she is far from alone. History is full of people who walked, sailed, or marched into the record and never walked back out. An entire Roman legion, a 50,000-strong army swallowed by the desert, 3 lighthouse keepers gone between one supply run and the next, 2 princes locked in a tower who were never seen again. Some of these vanishings have been partly cracked by modern science. Others are as dark today as the day they happened. These are 10 of history's most baffling disappearances. Let's start the countdown. Our first disappearance happened in the space of a few days on a rock in the North Atlantic. The Flannan Isles are a scatter of uninhabited islands off the west coast of Scotland, and in 1899 a lighthouse was built on the largest of them, Alien Moor, to guide ships past the treacherous rocks. It was manned by a rotating crew of 3 keepers. On December 15, 1900, a passing steamer noticed the light was dark. Bad weather delayed any investigation, and it wasn't until December 26th that the relief vessel finally reached the island. The keeper who went ashore found the lighthouse empty. The main door was closed. Inside, 2 of the 3 oilskin coats were gone, but one remained on its hook. A chair was overturned. The clock had stopped. The last entry in the logbook was dated December 15th. The 3 men, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, were never seen again. What happened in those 11 days has never been settled. The official investigation concluded the most likely explanation was that all 3 had been swept out to sea by a freak wave while securing equipment on the western landing, where the team later found ropes and a crane damaged by enormous seas. But that raises a hard question. Keepers were trained never to leave the light unattended and never to all go out into a storm together. Why would 3 experienced men break their own most basic rule and stand at the edge of the sea in weather violent enough to kill them? The wave theory is the consensus, but the truth is no one saw what happened, and no one ever will. The next person to vanish was one of the most wanted men in Europe, a rebel prince who slipped out of history without a grave. Owain Glyndŵr was a Welsh nobleman who, in the year 1400, launched a full-scale rebellion against English rule and had himself proclaimed Prince of Wales. For over a decade, he waged a brilliant guerrilla war, captured great castles like Harlech and Aberystwyth, summoned his own parliament, and came astonishingly close to winning Welsh independence. Then the tide turned. The English, led by the future King Henry V, ground the revolt down. Glyndŵr's castles fell, his family were captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London, and Glyndŵr himself, the figurehead of the whole rebellion, simply disappeared around 1415. Here is what makes his case so remarkable. He was never captured. He was never betrayed, despite very large rewards offered for his head. He was never confirmed killed. He twice refused a royal pardon, and then he vanished so completely that to this day no one knows where, when, or how he died, or where he is buried. The leading tradition holds that he lived out his final years quietly hidden among family in the countryside, possibly at his daughter's estate in Herefordshire, dying around 1415 and buried in a secret grave to keep his body from his enemies. But it has never been proven. One of the greatest figures in Welsh history, a man an entire nation was hunting, managed to erase himself so thoroughly that his final resting place has been lost for 600 years. In 1925, one of the most experienced explorers of his age walked into the Amazon rainforest and was never seen again. Colonel Percy Fawcett was a British surveyor and adventurer who had become convinced that somewhere in the uncharted jungle of Brazil lay the ruins of an ancient, advanced, lost civilization, a city he called simply Zed. In April 1925, backed by newspapers and geographical societies, Fawcett set out into the Mato Grosso with his elder son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rymel. On May 29, 1925, Fawcett sent a final message out with native runners from a place he called Dead Horse Camp. He wrote that he was pushing into unexplored territory and told his wife not to fear failure. That was the last anyone ever heard from any of the three. The disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts in exploration history, and it never stopped. Over the following decades, an estimated 100 or more would-be rescuers went looking for Fawcett, and by some counts, around 100 of them died or vanished themselves in the attempt. Theories abound that the party was killed by a hostile tribe, that they starved or fell ill, that Fawcett secretly chose to stay. In the 1950s, bones were recovered and claimed to be his, but analysis showed they weren't. And here is the twist history has added. Modern archaeology, using satellite and LiDAR imaging, has now revealed that the Amazon really did hold large, complex, ancient settlements. Exactly the kind of thing Fawcett insisted was there. He may have been wrong to walk into that jungle and write about what was hidden in it, and no one has ever found his body. The next disappearance is a crime with no bodies, no confession, and 2 child victims at the very heart of the English crown. In 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward V. The boy king and his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, were lodged in the Tower of London, at the time a royal residence as much as a prison, to await Edward's coronation. It never happened. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had the boys declared illegitimate and took the throne himself as King Richard III. Over the summer of 1483, the 2 princes were seen less and less, playing in the Tower grounds, and then they were seen no more. They simply vanished from history, and their fate became the most enduring murder mystery in the English monarchy. For centuries, the dominant story, cemented by Tudor writers and by Shakespeare, was that Richard III had them murdered to secure his crown. In 1674, workmen at the Tower dug up a wooden box containing the bones of 2 children, which were reburied in Westminster Abbey as the presumed princes, but they have never been definitively tested with modern DNA. And the case is still moving. Recent research by historian Philippa Langley has gathered documents she argues suggest at least one of the boys may have survived and lived on under another name, while in 2024, another historian pointed to a discovery in an old will as fresh evidence in the murder case. More than 5 centuries later, we still cannot say for certain whether the princes in the Tower were murdered, by whom, or whether one of them lived. The bones in the Abbey keep their secret. Our 6th disappearance is not of a person, but of 5,000 of them at once. The 9th Legion, Legio the 9th Hispana, was one of the elite fighting units of the Roman Empire, a battle-hardened legion that had served for centuries, fought in the conquest of Britain, and was nearly destroyed in the famous revolt of Boudica before recovering. And then, sometime in the 2nd century AD, it dropped out of the historical record entirely. The last firm evidence of the 9th in Britain is an inscription at the legionary fortress of York, dated to around 108 AD. After that, the legion is simply never mentioned in Britain again. It does not appear on a later list of active legions carved in Rome. An entire legion, thousands of trained soldiers and their eagle standard, seems to vanish from history without a recorded battle, defeat, or disbandment. The romantic theory, made famous by novels and films, is that the 9th marched north into the Scottish Highlands to crush the wild Caledonian tribes and was ambushed and annihilated to the last man, which would help explain why the Romans later built Hadrian's Wall to seal off the north. But most modern historians are skeptical. They point to fragments of evidence suggesting the ninth may actually have been transferred out of Britain and posted to the European mainland, perhaps later destroyed in a war in the East decades afterward. The problem is that no one can prove where or when the Legion actually met its end. Whether it died screaming in a Scottish glen or quietly faded away on a distant frontier, the fate of Rome's lost Legion remains genuinely unresolved. Our fifth disappearance swallowed 2 ships and 129 men, and it is the one where modern science has clawed back the most answers. In 1845, the British Royal Navy sent its most advanced polar expedition yet to find the Northwest Passage through the frozen top of North America. 2 reinforced ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, under the command of Sir John Franklin, sailed into the Arctic and were never seen again by European eyes. When they failed to return, Britain launched a search that would span decades. Slowly, grim pieces emerged from the ice, abandoned equipment, graves, and a single written note revealing that the ships had become trapped in the ice, that Franklin was dead, and that the survivors had abandoned the vessels to try to walk out overland. None of them made it. Inuit testimony told of starving men dragging boats south, dying as they went, and, disturbingly, of evidence that the last survivors had resorted to cannibalism. For over 150 years, the ships themselves were lost. Then, in 2014, the wreck of the Erebus was found on the Arctic seabed, and in 2016, the Terror was located too, both remarkably preserved. And the science hasn't stopped. In recent years, DNA testing has begun putting names to the scattered bones, identifying individual sailors more than 170 years after they died, and forensic analysis of cut marks on those bones has confirmed the cannibalism the Inuit had described. We now know roughly what happened to Franklin's men: ice, cold, starvation, lead-tainted supplies, and desperation. But the deepest question still stands. Exactly how and why a well-equipped expedition of experienced sailors ended in such total catastrophe is something the Arctic has only partly given back. Our fourth disappearance is one of the oldest and largest on this list. An entire army gone in a single afternoon. Around 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II had conquered Egypt. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses then dispatched an army of 50,000 men across the Egyptian desert to attack the oasis of Siwa and destroy the famous oracle of Amun there. The army set out from Thebes. They reached a staging oasis, and then, Herodotus writes, as they marched into the vast sand sea, a monstrous windstorm rose up from the south, a wall of sand that buried the entire force alive. 50,000 soldiers, he says, simply vanished beneath the dunes and were never seen again. For most of modern history, scholars treated this as a tall tale, a story Herodotus had heard second-hand, too enormous to be literally true. But the legend has never quite died, because the desert occasionally hints that something is out there. In 2009, 2 Italian archaeologists announced they had found human bones, bronze weapons, and other artifacts in the desert near Siwa that they claimed could be the remains of Cambyses' lost army, a claim that made headlines worldwide. Other experts pushed back hard, questioning the evidence and the researchers, and the find has never been broadly accepted. So the situation today is genuinely open. We don't know whether 50,000 men really lie somewhere under the Sahara, whether Herodotus exaggerated a smaller disaster, or whether the whole march is a myth. The largest army ever said to have vanished may still be out there, or may never have existed at all. Our third disappearance is a fleet so large it may have been the biggest naval force assembled anywhere on Earth before modern times, destroyed, according to legend, by the wind itself. In 1281, the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan, having already conquered China, launched his second massive invasion of Japan. he assembled a staggering armada, by the traditional accounts, around 4,000 ships carrying more than 100,000 men. The invasion force reached the coast of Kyushu in southern Japan and met fierce resistance from samurai defenders holding a defensive wall along the shore. For weeks, the two sides fought. And then, as the enormous Mongol fleet lay crowded in the bay, a colossal typhoon roared in from the sea. It smashed the ships against each other and against the rocks, and in a matter of hours, it destroyed the bulk of Kublai Khan's navy. Tens of thousands of men drowned. The Japanese believed their islands had been saved by a divine wind, a kamikaze sent by the gods. For centuries, this was history mixed with myth, and skeptics wondered whether the numbers had been wildly exaggerated. But then, the sea floor started giving up proof. Underwater archaeologists working off the Japanese coast, especially near Takashima Island, have recovered anchors, ceramic bombshells, weapons, and even sections of the Mongol ships themselves from the mud of the bay. Hard physical confirmation that an immense fleet really was wrecked here. What the archaeology also hints at is a human story behind the disaster. Evidence that many of the hastily built ships were poorly constructed, riverboats never meant for open ocean, which may be why they broke apart so completely. The wind was real, the fleet was real, but the full scale of what lies buried in that seabed is still being uncovered. Our second disappearance is the single largest loss of life in United States Navy history, not directly caused by combat, and it happened without so much as a distress signal. The USS Cyclops was a huge naval collier, a ship built to haul coal to fuel the fleet, more than 500 feet long. In early 1918, during the First World War, she was carrying a heavy cargo of dense manganese ore from Brazil back toward Baltimore, with 306 people aboard. She made an unscheduled stop in Barbados in early March 1918, then sailed north into the Atlantic and simply never arrived. No wreckage was found, no bodies were recovered, no radio distress call was ever received. All 306 men vanished with the ship, somewhere in the stretch of ocean that would later be nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle. Because it happened in wartime, suspicion first fell on German submarines or mines, but German records, examined after the war, showed no U-boat had sunk her. That left the sea itself. The leading modern explanation is grimly practical. The Cyclops was likely overloaded with heavy ore. She had a known engine problem, and she may have sailed into a storm that caused the dense cargo to shift or the structurally strained hull to fail, sending her to the bottom so fast that no one had time to send a signal. It's a plausible theory, but it has never been confirmed, because in over a century of searching, the wreck of the Cyclops has never been found. The largest non-combat loss in Navy history remains officially an open case. And so we come back to the greatest ghost ship of them all. On December 4, 1872, the crew of a ship called the Dei Gratia spotted a vessel moving strangely across the Atlantic between the Azores and Portugal. She was under partial sail but yawing about as if no one had the helm. When they drew alongside and hailed her, there was no answer. A boarding party climbed aboard the Mary Celeste and found one of the eeriest scenes in maritime history. The ship was, by and large, in good order. Her cargo of over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol was almost entirely intact. There was 6 months of food and fresh water aboard. The crew's personal belongings, valuables and pipes were still in place, the sort of things no one abandoning ship would leave behind. But every one of the 10 people who had sailed on her, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter and 7 crew, was gone. The single lifeboat was missing, and a rope was found trailing off the back of the ship into the sea. That detail is the heart of the mystery. Someone had deliberately launched the lifeboat and left a seaworthy ship in the middle of the ocean. But why? Over 150 years, the theories have piled up. The most credible modern explanation is that fumes from the alcohol cargo may have leaked and threatened an explosion, or seemed to, causing Captain Briggs to order everyone into the lifeboat temporarily, tied to the ship by that trailing rope until the danger passed. If that rope then snapped in rising weather, the ship would have sailed on without them, leaving the 10 of them stranded in a small open boat on the Atlantic to be lost. It fits the evidence better than any tale of pirates or sea monsters. But it can never be proven, because not one of the 10 was ever found, and the Mary Celeste never gave up what really happened on her decks that day. If you enjoy evidence-based history and ancient mysteries, subscribe to History Decoded. New investigations are released every week, and next time, we go looking for the people history erased on purpose.